Hey there, folks. I'm Matt Hansen,
And I'm John Johnson.
and you're listening to Planes, Trains, and Comic Books, the podcast where we discuss favorites we've reread, both classic and new comics we want to read, and everything else in between.
And here's the comic we picked this week.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Planes, Trains, and Comic Books. I'm Matt. That's John. We got Jason Douglas here, the writer of the comic book Parallel, for an interview. So let's get this thing started.
Heck yeah.
Jason, what is the breakdown of Parallel? Like, what would you say?
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for having me on. It is my pleasure, my honor to be here with you today. Parallel is my very first venture into the world of graphic novels, into the world of comic books. It's a 64-page one-shot that basically it's a dark sci-fi tale that begs the question of you, the audience. What price would you pay for a second chance at the dreams you thought you left behind? So those are the underlying themes. It's wrapped in this very nice sci-fi construct where Landon, our protagonist, has given up on his dreams of a career in music in his early 20s and wakes up 5-10 years later suffering what the kids are calling these days the quarter-life crisis, that existential dread, that anxiety of time passing, and because you deferred your dreams, as so many of us do at a certain age, and now maybe it's too late. He's kind of at that nadir of depression, and that's how that dread is manifesting for him. And at kind of the height of that manifestation for him, he starts to hear voices and see visions and question his own sanity, as I think any reasonable person would. But in this case, it's actually an alternate version of him reaching out and offering him a second chance at the life that he thought he left behind. Unfortunately for our Landon, the cost of such a chance might not be in his best mental and physical interests in the here and now. So the book gets pretty dark and pretty twisted in spots where Landon is kind of going back and forth on, is this happening in his head or is this really happening? And you as the reader kind of flip-flop through that throughout the book too. And it's really a crescendo, especially in the second half of building tension and building stakes on what he's going to do to get this possible second chance that so many of us don't get in life.
Yeah, I you know what I noticed like the wait. I think after I read it, I said I texted you and said, "Hey, what is this? What happens?" You're like, "Hey, it's up to you, man. It's the reader."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, okay, I get it. That makes sense." But
Yeah, I mean that was really part of the plan from the beginning. I mean, I wrote the first half of this thing in a bubble, right, with no intention. Well, not no intention, but no frame of reference for what would happen next, right? I mean, it's not attached to a publisher at that point. It's not even attached to an artist. It's just something that I had to do. And, but conscious from the beginning was the ambiguity that I wanted to imbue in the book, but also one of the things that I'm a huge fan of as a comic fan and a fanboy myself is like rereadability and the kind of story that you get your bang for the buck. And I think that's really important in comics, especially indie comics. And it's not necessarily disclosable. And the rewarding the reader that when you go back and read it for a second or a third time, you might even interpret it differently and see things differently. Mm-hmm. In the same way, I mean, it kind of runs, forgive me for saying this out loud, but it kind of runs parallel to what like Landon goes through in the book, which is, one page, he is absolutely certain that this is all happening in his head and it's just like a mental breakdown. In the next page, it's absolutely real to him. Mm-hmm. Same kind of thing for the reader. And I like is you're going to believe one thing on one page and something else on the next page and maybe feel differently about that on your second or third time through.
Yeah, it was very cool. And like you said, the second time I did read it, I was like, okay, like I see exactly what you were talking about where you're like, oh, and it also depends on what frame of mind, like how you're
reading. Sure.
Because also, like, I don't know if you see behind me, I play drums. I when I went to music school and everything, I was Landon when I was a kid, like when I was in my 20s. So I was like, I'm gonna be I'm gonna be the drummer for Rush when Neil Peart, retires.
Yeah, right.
So then I met my wife, got married, got a real job and everything. And it's like, okay, this book speaks to me on a different level, possibly than other people reading it if they didn't have that same music
Well,
kind of thing.
I love that. I love that, and that really warms my heart that you say that. But like, even if your dream, like Landon's and yours, wasn't music, I mean, the other thing that I'm really, really proud of about this book, and I hope connects with people, is I think that theme of the existential dread that comes to all of us at different points in our life, with time passing and us setting aside what we want, and hey, you've always got more time, and that's just not true. I think it's pretty universal. And what struck me, I think, when writing it, but really when just talking about it since it's been published and since it's been out in the world, and like talking to people like you guys, is that idea for people is so isolating, right? Like this idea that you're going through this alone because it's the choices that you made or the choices that you didn't make, and you go through that, however it manifests for you, whether it's depression or anxiety or dread or just stagnation or that paralyzing fear of just like, because I didn't do something, now I can't do anything. However that shows up in your life, and whenever it does, it tends to isolate us, and we tend to internalize it and bottle it up and go it alone. And the kind of the dark irony of that is we suffered alone, and yet just about everybody that we have ever known is going through some version of that in their own way at a different time. So like, one of the lessons I hope people take away from the book is it's always better to talk about it. It's always better to deal with it with somebody than to not, and to try to bottle it up. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the reasons that I really, really wanted a kind of positive portrayal of the mental health industry in this book was simply that. Like, that's an avenue that is there for you, whether it's reaching out and talking to family or friends or actually seeking professional help. Like, there's always somebody who can talk to, and 9 times out of 10, you're going to be surprised because they're going to be able to relate to it in their own way as well.
I'm going to jump in right here, because that's where I was when I started reading this. So especially through the pandemic here, that's something that I was kind of like working through more, was my own mental health. And my wife and my friends, luckily around us, really passionate about, making sure like, that you talk through things, you don't keep things bottled up inside. And so reading this, like, I know a lot of times, obviously it gets very dark. It gets, there's a lot of very big twists that are like, whoa, like you gotta kind of like take a deep breath, like that just happened. But I kind of also got like a really good sense of it. And again, because of the different things people are going through, between Matt and I, especially, like I got a really sense of like hope for him throughout the comic too. And I thought that was really, I don't know, it felt unique to him through everything that he's going through, especially
it could have gone super dark.
Yeah, it could like, you could have completely gone off and some of the comics nowadays, like that, they go dark and they just keep going down the rabbit hole. And it was nice, it was refreshing, I would say, almost, to not automatically go there.
Well, there's, without giving away too much, I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity to that splash page at the end, right?
Right.
Yes.
And I'll tell you, like when this first came out in the world, and the release of it was like just jacked up beyond belief, because it was mid-pandemic, and Diamond shut down, and these people were getting it ahead of schedule, and these people were getting it months later. But like, as reaction to it started to trickle in, I was fascinated. One of the kind of cool things about being on the other side of the process, being like a fan my whole life, was getting those reactions trickling in. And I'll tell you, up front, it was actually pretty tied reaction-wise about what happens to Land at the end. It was 50-50 for a while, a fairly dark outcome for him and a fairly hopeful one. But since then, now almost a full year later, I'd say it actually has skewed a lot closer to like 80-20. People's reactions on the hopeful side, and him moving forward, as opposed to ending up somewhere that would be a little bit darker, as you mentioned.
It's all about the frame of mind you read it in, I think, too. Like,
and I think it says something about you, the way you interpret it too, which is always like I'm my day job for the last 2 decades has been a public school teacher, and I taught elementary school for a long time, and I've been teaching middle school for like for 8-9 years now. And like, whenever we do like something, I've got to tell these young teenagers is like, we'll do like poetry and stuff, and about when you interpret the meaning of it, there's like no wrong answer, right? And like, once it's out of the artist's hands, it's no longer whatever they intended, no matter how strongly or not strongly that the artist may feel about it. And like, is there an answer to that question that people ask me a lot about the ending, or about is it really happening, or is it all in his head? I mean, maybe there's an answer, but it's so much more fun to to dig through the clues and make the decision for yourself. And that's one of the reasons why that ambiguity was built into it from day one.
Right, and it could be ambiguous like daily, because
Oh, sure.
like you could have a day where you're like, I hate my job today. I remember just going back and playing drums for fun all day long, and I wish I was back there. And then you read it, and then you're like, yeah, I feel like that one day, and then the next day everything's going great, and you read it, you're like, nah, it's more hopeful today. Yeah, it's very cool that way. But you were talking about your history with comics and stuff. Let's kind of dig into your history, like. Where did you grow up? What did you read? Comics wise and stuff, and who are your favorites?
I am a child who came to. I was a child who came to everything cool a little bit late, or what is at least considered cool now, right? Because I'm old enough where nerd was a bad word when I was a kid, and especially in high school, maybe that was even disguised a little bit in me. But I came to everything a little bit late because I've got I grew up without an older sibling, without older cousins nearby, without that, the dude down the street who said, here, come this way, and I will show you what you need to listen to and watch and consume.
Right.
And my parents were decidedly uncool people. My mom, oh, she hates it when I say this. I'm going to tell you anyway. My mom said no to free tickets to see the Beatles in 1965 at Olympia in Detroit because she had to stay back and wash her hair, which was like a teenage thing in the 60s, I guess. And said no, did not go. Okay. And so
maybe her hair was really
balancing
bad.
Act where baseball and basketball cards and music and movies and comics and stuff, I always was a year or two behind my contemporaries. But have this kind of high functioning OCD where once I was in, was I in. So once the comic bug, bit me in the very late 80s, early 90s, I was all in, right? And that's the era of you're either chasing the the predecessor, the grandfather to the variant covers of today are the enhanced embossed foil dye, cut out covers and stuff like that, or the image boom happens right there, or Superman dies, or Batman gets his back broken, and you're but at the exact same time, Vertigo is putting out Sandman, and Alan Moore is at his height, and Neil is there, and Morrison is there, and then at the exact same time, the Image is exploding, and it's the it's the artist boom. For whatever reason, I then just drifted to kind of its polar opposite company on the other side of the indie aisle, which was Valiant, and more realistic art,
Jim Shooter,
a bit more attention to story, and a really tight interwoven universe. Where Marvel and DC had spilled out and multiverse was a mess. Valiant was still small enough and pretty tight, and I just locked in, and that kind of became my jam. And then I did that thing that it's very typical of the comic fan story is at some point in my kind of mid-late teens, I walked away and took a 9-year hiatus from comics. Right. And the only 2 books that I actually took with me, kind of left it all behind in a couple of long boxes in my parents' closet. Right. And the only thing I took with me off to college was I took Sandman with me, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and I took Art Spiegelman's Mouse.
Oh, nice.
Which I actually ended up having to read for a couple of classes in college. And then ironically, it was almost 9 years later, it was Neil Gaiman who actually brought me back into a comic shop for the very first time. And he was publishing coming back to comics after several novels in a row, and he was coming back and he was doing that Marvel 1602 project.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Which apparently was canon, but it's the kind of hyper fantastical version of them in the end of the Elizabethan age. And I think, if I remember correctly, he was actually doing that to raise money for his battle against Todd McFarlane and the Spawn thing.
Yes,
and that brought me back into comic shops, and I walked in there and I started scooping that up, and then I was hooked again. OCD kicked in again, and I've been, an adult person now, kind of doing this 50-50 balance of reading and following things that writers or artists or worlds that they create, any, give me anything that Eric Powell is doing.
Okay.
Give me anything that Mike Mignola and the Hellboy universe is doing,
Of
right? To Jeff Lemire is like, please.
Oh yeah, we read Sweet Tooth.
Still-
Oh yeah.
To still kind of pursuing the young kid collector in me, where I'm putting together runs and I'm still hunting a key or two here or there, and I might not be able to say no to a flashy cover. Oh, let me show you this. So one of the kind of awesome kind of nerding out things that happened in the process of putting Parallel out in the world was, you fulfill this lifelong dream and suddenly you're on that other side of the process. But something that really caught me off guard right after the publication was, without me initiating it, several exclusive variants were made of my book, and woo, boys,
That's cool.
So this one, this is like a variant cover of Parallel with like the shattered glass.
Oh wow.
There's
Yeah.
few of these left in the world. Okay. I think it's like less than 50 of these are left. And then 2 more were made, and both of these sold out in under 48 hours. Look at this bad boy.
Oh nice.
It's
That's
like
creepy.
the Donnie Darko
Donnie
Omid.
Darko,
And
yeah.
then
Yeah.
because why not? Let's do the shiny cover. There was only a few of these. This is a virgin foil variant of that the store gifted me, a slab 9.8.
Oh wow. Nice.
And
That's super cool.
Yeah. So yeah, those like are gone. Maybe you can find them on eBay every once in a while, but like, oh my God, did I nerd out about that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I was talking about like how you got into stuff. I have an older brother, so he was my conduit to everything cool or whatever,
Yeah.
But I think John, I might be your older brother with everything cool.
with comics especially. Like I read comics, but it was like stuff that my folks got me, or like Spider-Man, because I was young. I was like, oh man, I
Right.
love the Spider-Man, I love the Sinister Six and whatnot. My mom was like, it's like that. He's like, hey, look, I found this, and it was like Death of Superman. I was like, okay, that's why I got that, is because there was a million printings of that
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah, sure.
His dad was like, I'm going to send you to college with this one day, kid.
And nope. One thing I wanted to backtrack just a little, because one of the things I really liked in Parallel is all the references that you have to physics and
Yeah.
math and psychology. And I just kind of, obviously, for one thing, kudos to you going through the pandemic as a teacher. Like,
Yeah, what kind of teacher are you?
I like good or bad. I like
No.
to think I'm a good teacher, but if
Yeah.
you're talking about like I guess
Subject.
what we call it genre,
Yeah.
I'm an 8th grade ELA teacher. So like
ELA.
my day job is convincing 13 and 14-year-olds that like nouns are not boring.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. They're actually very exciting. All right.
Oh, thrilling. There's nothing like a pronoun to just put a pep in your step when you're
Yeah.
14 years old.
I tell you, before high school, the only things I ever read were comics. I never had any interest in reading. I didn't like English class or anything. And then Lord of the Rings is what did it for me. I read.
Oh, nice.
My teacher forced me to read Lord of the Rings as part of the class, and I just, something about that world. Once we got past chapter 7, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I don't know what I learned Elvish. I was like into this thing, and
When I taught elementary school for the first 13 years of my career, and one of the read alouds I would do with the 4th graders every single year is I'd read them The Hobbit, do all the voices. I've got a pretty mean Gollum. And then, but what I would do to like totally nerd out is I would make each kid a packet, because I've got the Middle Earth Atlas. And so like we'd make this packet of maps, and literally with a highlighter, like follow their route. And then you flip, you get to Baron's house, and the map is like zooming in on where everybody sat in the front porch and the back porch and stuff like that. And we just highlight their route as they went through, as they got
That's
closer
cool.
and closer to the mountain. And it was just so much fun. Yeah.
yeah, that sounds super fun. I wish I had teachers that did that when I was in. You said it was 4th grade.
Yeah. 4th grade for a long time, and
Okay.
8th grade now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's cool. And I think English teachers like that really opened my eyes to like, once I started reading, I was like, give me everything. So that kind
Well,
of
I think
helped.
finding that gateway for people is like super important. And especially in my elementary school days, like comics actually were a huge part of my classroom, because what I noticed from the beginning, like even when I was like a kid myself and sitting in that room at like 22 years old, it really struck me like the stigma for young readers that were already a couple years behind.
Yes.
And you know, you don't improve, you don't get over that hump that you're at and that deficit you're at if you read stuff above your reading level and you can't comprehend it. And yet the stigma of reading a baby book for like a fourth grade boy was so huge that like you'd walk around the classroom and there'd be like this kid during silent reading time with like a copy of Harry Potter upside down and reading it backwards at the same time, because you can't, it was just such a negative to have something age appropriate in their hands.
Right.
The minute I brought comics into the classroom, this is about the exact same time that Scholastic got on board with like publishing Bone and Color and stuff like that. Like it did not, guys, it did not matter what the comic was or what age level it was. You put that comic in that kid's hand and the stigma's gone.
Something about that magic.
Yeah. And it was just awesome. And it like, and suddenly like the results spoke for themselves. And I had these voracious readers, and I actually went, and when I would go to the comic shops, I would dig through like the 10-cent bin, like the quarter bin, like the stuff that's just trash. Like a collector wouldn't even buy it for a reader copy, you know? But it's like late 70s, early 80s Marvel and DC, which, you know, is pre the darkening of everything and thus having to create like a Marvel Age label or something like that. Right. You grab these words of perfectly, you know, appropriate stories or whatever. And what I would do is I would cut them into pieces, take them apart, take them into the copy room, laminate the whole thing. And then I don't know if you remember from a kid, like those book binding machines to like make a little spiral, and like turn it into these copies that like were indestructible. And those would be in the classroom as well. So instead of like having floppies that would last, you know, 10 minutes in a kid's hand, it was like these laminated copies.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. I go to like this Scholastic warehouse sale every year and like rebuy the run of Bone because they read them so much that they would just get trashed every year. You know, the soft cover copies of it, and just kind of rebuy them every single year at like $10 a pop or whatever I was getting them for less, and just kind of fed them through that. It was great.
Yeah, I came to Bone way later than, you know, I was supposed to, I guess. And we read it for the podcast, and I was like I had first read it like the first volume when they came out in the Scholastic versions in the mid 2000s, and I was like, this is like kid stuff. And then like like I'm 29 or whatever, I'm not supposed to read this or whatever. So I don't know what my point of view was on that, but you know, I was dumb and young and whatever. So like but then when we read it for the podcast, I was like, this is amazing. Like, why didn't I see this before? And then I bought the black and white complete one. I read the whole thing in like a day.
Oh, the brick.
Like,
yeah.
I was like, this is amazing. And this is like, it was so good. That to get a kid to read all of that. And if you broke it up into those books or you have those books separately, it doesn't seem as daunting, you know, for a kid either. So Scholastic really, I think, brought comics to the, you know, the mainstream, especially because you could buy those on, like you said, they have school magazines for Scholastic, and now schools are now a big market for comic books too.
Huge. Yeah.
And I was surprised it took the big two so long to really catch on to that, where they're like, now they're starting to put out more YA stuff, but like, that was only in the last like 4 or 5 years where they were really focusing.
Well, I mean, it's like, I usually get to this point on how I feel about like the big two through a different route, like when I talk to people, but the reality is, for all the advantages that Marvel and DC have with 80 years of infrastructure and reaching a wide audience, that 80 years of infrastructure can actually hold you back.
Yeah.
Whether it's the editorial mandate or the selling habits or whatever. In the case of like reaching that market, I mean, like Top Shelf reached more kids than Marvel and DC did for years, right?
They had Alley, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like my buddy Jeffrey Brown, who was one of my inspirations to get off my butt and write my own book. Like his Jedi Academy stuff was like, you put that in a classroom and kids just ate that up as much as they did Diary of a Wimpy Kid, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, it's very cool to see that, but then I just always wonder, like, why did it take so long for them to see it, and then why are they struggling so hard at hitting that market when it seems fairly easy to market like get the writers that are doing the good stuff and be like, hey, you want to write a book for us? Like, I don't know what they miss, but every now and then, like, I have a niece and she's like 10, and I'll go to the comic book store and I'll buy her like the reprints that they put out of like the Paul Dini Batman Adventures. And I'll be like, I know this is good for kids. I know it's fun, and I know it's not going to be like a miss as far as the art and the writing, because it's Paul Dini and it's Ty Templeton or whatever. So I'm like, yeah, read this, and it's like the Batgirl or whatever. So I'm like, okay, it's cool for girls too. She wants to read that. So like, it's. But when I walk through, I'll see some titles. I'm like, who is this for? Like, this seems weirdly not aimed at anybody, but it's still in the YA section, or it's like, that's odd. And there's always been, because I used to work at a comic book store in Austin, and the kids section was always like, here you go, here's like a little tiny section, and it's got like Scooby-Doo and like 2 other comics or a Power Pack or something, and that was like it. And it's like, should we be having a focus on the kids section as well? And then like you have a strong kids section, and then that grows into, those kids grow up into the other readers later on. So that might be what's happening, is the readers are, they never grew up reading those ones, or they had to go back, like you were saying, go back to the 80s to read appropriate stories that are fun and age appropriate and all that stuff. So, and the art's fan, I mean, you got George Perez on Teen Titans and all that stuff. It's like, what is there not to like? So,
well, if you're a student of the history of comic books at all, that very rarely do the marketing or business or whatever decisions over the decades make the most sense of what would be best for storytelling or the industry. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. Well, it just seemed like maybe they were trying. Well, usually, you're right. It's like if you think about how Spider-Man was made, it wasn't because they were like, why don't we focus a lot of energy on hitting this new market that we think is there? It's like, hey, Stan, you're going to get canceled. Come up with, he comes up with this character that he didn't think would make it, with Steve Ditko drawing it, and then, oh my God, it sold so much, and now it's a hit, and it was random and an accident. So that's very true. A lot of their hits are accidents that they just ran with for long enough. And I think there's now like a resurgence in this indie market, like your stuff, and a lot of there's a lot of stuff coming out from creators that are kind of trying to either focus on kids or just trying to focus on writing good stories in general, in like, even from Image stuff, but even just other like you said, Top Shelf or Fantagraphics or things like that.
Sure.
They're trying to just focus on writing good stories more and whatnot. So it's like the industry is a weird thing right now, but
oh, for sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Speaking of just comics in general, do you read digitally more, or do you actually go to the store now and buy floppies? And
so I'm very old school in my buying and collecting. Like there are only 2 slabs in my house and in my possession right now. The variant that I showed you, right?
Okay, yeah.
And then this, which I might as well tell you this right now. So there's a 9/8 slab of the actual book. This, people need to come over and follow me on Instagram, because by the end of August, this is going to be given away on the website.
Nice.
Or on Instagram. So this is going to be a free giveaway. But those are the only 2 slabs I own, because like I am so old school in my collecting. Just give me it all raw, because that's what it was when I was a kid. And I take that even further, where I have not bought a comic online. I've never bought one digitally. And I've never even bought a comic online since I got ripped off by eBay in the early days. Wow. When I got a first appearance of I bought a first appearance of Teen Titans, and like in the early days of eBay, where not all the kinks were worked out about how they could trick you and fool you, and like the image was cropped just so that the condition was anyway. So like I am a live in person kind of go hunt them down in the long boxes, or go to a local store or a shop or something only. Very much the same way that when I was a teenager, my mission in life in the mid 90s was to hunt down every single Led Zeppelin album on vinyl, first pressing, before eBay was even an option. Like I still go and do my hunt. So I'm trying to put together a run of this or a run of that. It might take an extra year to find it, because I'm only going to go find it if I dig through a bin. It took me, so I mentioned Valiant, right, as a kid.
Yeah.
Well, one of my first missions back in the hobby as an adult was I was going to complete the Valiant run, like all the books up through those last kind of harder to find acclaim comics from like 95, 96. And I had everything, guys. I had everything except for an Exo Man of War number 62, not the last issue, towards the end, but just like 62.
Yeah.
And could not find it. And I look on eBay, and there it was for like $3 tops. And it was so tempting. But I ended up like waiting like a full year before I finally found it, like in a random dollar bin. And was like, and it was like the sensation and the gratification delayed was magnificent.
Yes.
So you probably exclaimed in the store, right? You're like, I
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I got it. I'd be like, what'd you find? And he's like, number 62 of Man of Exo
Like,
Man of
what?
War.
Oh.
What is that, a first
Everything
appearance?
That, like you found some gem, like some hidden gem.
Yeah.
No, it's an Exo Man. Who? They don't even know
Who?
what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. That's funny. I'm right now, I got back into my collecting phase where I'm trying to complete runs of stuff or just like nostalgically going back and like, I want
Yeah.
all the Batmans from this era or whatever. Or so I know exactly what you're talking about. I won't go on eBay because I could buy the whole run on eBay for $100 or whatever and be like, yeah, I got it now. But that's no fun. It's
Right,
all
right.
about going to, and I want to pay like 25 cents to $1 max for each issue. I don't want to pay anything. You know? So I'm like, yeah, I got to look through everything. Oh, that one, yeah, that was doable. That was not too bad or whatever. So
Well, I've got a bunch of runs that I'm close to being done with that are very much, for the most part, like dollar bin kind of runs. And I'll tell you what, a frustrating thing about comic collecting these days that I've run into with a couple of them are when something in the middle of that run that people have ignored for years or decades suddenly gets hot, and you're
Yes.
like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to, right? So I was putting together, and I'm one issue away from putting together a Marvel Fanfare run. And I got super lucky in the fact that I picked up those Black Widow issues, those 3 or 4 issues right there, right before. So I got those all for like $1 right before they blew up, right, with the announcement of the movie like 2 years ago. And but there's other ones that kind of like kicked me in the butt, like trying to put together my New Mutants run.
oh yeah,
Like
yeah, good luck.
You know, like 98 is well, and oh my God, the sick, horrible irony of me trying to put together New Mutants run was I had in the month that came out, I had a New Mutants 98 back in the day, and I traded it for a New Mutants 95 to my neighbor because at the time, Wolverine was on the cover of 95, jumping at Cable's face with its claws out. And on 98 was these 2 weird back-to-back skinny dudes with their feet hidden that are like, who are those guys? I don't care about those guys.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
That was Deadpool.
Might have not been the best decision I ever made.
We've all been there. I actually lucked out recently. Hey, look at that box over there in the corner.
Oh yeah,
So look with your headphones. Watch your headphones.
I'll grab it.
I lucked out because I just collect runs nostalgically. I didn't have any interest in like, specking or anything like that. And when I worked at the comic book store, before I left, I went to music school. I was like, I want the full run of Batman Adventures. Just, because I'm a kid, right? I was like, that's what I read when I was a kid. I want that. And it was $35 for all the issues. I'm like, yeah, I'll pick them out. Didn't even know that was the first appearance of Harley Quinn, number 12 or whatever. It's in the box right there, dude. Oh, yeah. And so then I was like, I just watched videos, and I didn't know that the whole thing blew up recently. But yeah, so the only slab book I have is my 9.6 of the first appearance of Harley Quinn. But
that's nice.
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't really care that it's that. Like, she's not one of my favorite characters or anything, but like everybody else is, and I'm like, I would be stupid not to. I knew it was in good condition because, like, I bagged and boarded all my stuff, and when I got it, it was already bagged and boarded from like whoever had it and everything. So I was like, yeah, like it just happened and that's the first thing I ever CGC, probably the only thing I'll ever CGC, but
very cool.
And if I was trying to complete that run now, like I said, I bought the whole run. It's 30 books. I think I bought it for $35. So it's like less than $1 a piece. and that was 15 years after her, first appearance, like in the show or whatever. So it's kind of like, I don't know what blew. I mean, obviously the movies blew it up, and like everybody liked
Sure.
it, but just the idea that that is going to go up, I was like, okay, I have to slap.
Oh, I was so angry. So, besides putting together like a run here or a run there, smaller ones, or this one's ridiculous. I'm trying to put together an X-Men run from 1 through 300, which is unattainable, but I'm trying for it anyway. I'll do a themed run. So like right now I'm working on the Marvel 25th anniversary covers, and like it's like so ridiculous. Like some of those Star comics that are like you couldn't pay someone to take those off your hands on most of those issues, and those are outrageous. Or I just missed the Captain America one, and that's John Walker's first appearance. Nobody cared about that for decades, and now it's through the roof. Or the one I think that frustrated me the most, because it wasn't even like show or TV related, is I'll hunt down give me a Mignola cover, give me a Jay Lee cover, and give me a Barry Windsor Smith cover. Like those are probably my top 3 cover artists of all time. And you're hunting down Barry Windsor Smith once he's into his style, right? Like post Conan. And 3 great covers and great interior art, or 4 of them are from the Machine Man mini. Those are like quarter band books for decades. And then suddenly number 2 is way too much to pay for something you just want a really cool bit of art for, because of the whole, Iron Man 2020 or whatever. And
Right.
Hitting me. Like this was a quarter yesterday, and now you want, $30-$40 for it. Get out of here.
For sure. Yeah. And I feel like that too. So I not ashamed to say this, but I was, a 90s kid. I read a lot of Supreme. I read a lot of the Rob Liefeld stuff, comics. That's what spoke to me when I'm like, yes, I need those big guns and small ankles and shoulder pads and pouches on pouches. Yeah, lots of pouches. Yeah. And so I'm like, I was trying to find, I'm like, Supreme, it has to be easy to find. It's not going to be a movie anytime soon. And people are putting like number 1, $10, because it's number 1. It's just a number 1 comic. Yeah. I'm like, this is not worth $10. It's ridiculous. And then even the ones after that, they're like any profit or anything I'm trying to find.
Right.
I'm like, no. So I finally found a shop in Austin that has like 25-cent bins, and they'll actually have things like that in there, or they'll have like dollar bins. They'll have that stuff too. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
that's a normal shop. Like I don't need this specking stuff for no reason.
Well, how about like a Shadowhawk Volume 2, number 2, but it's got a shiny mirror cover and it's die cut? Come on.
Yeah, that's at least $10. That's at least worth $10. Right. But yeah, it's crazy how that market is right now. I'm doing a Batman run because I'm never gonna get like below 300, like with like cheaply or whatever. So I'm like a Batman detective and Batman run up through the when the New 52 started. So trying to get those 2 runs, like that run solid all the way through. And there's some really, really expensive books in there, like the Todd McFarlane covers and stuff of Batman and whatnot. So I'm like, we'll see. Maybe I can find some beer, or by the time I get to that, the market will have blown apart and no one cares anymore. And we'll see. Maybe, I don't know. But
I wish you the best of luck. I feel your pain.
Thank you. Yeah, you too. Good collecting, right? So.
Yeah.
So who is your absolute favorite comic book character?
Neil Gaiman, Sandman.
Sandman, for sure.
I mean, I was like a Batman kid. I was a Batman kid if you're going to talk superheroes, but it was definitely Sandman. Probably a little too young for it when I came to it, not really understanding fully, but like I locked in and was there. And Sandman Mystery Theater at the same time, which is like like at 12 years old, like who's reading Sandman? It's a noir mystery with Guy Davis art that is not late 80s, early 90s cool kid art, and yet I locked into both those books. So definitely that is my favorite. It's my favorite character. It's my favorite story. It's my favorite writer.
Do you think that comic book writer? Do you think that is like a reason why you went into English? Is that like a reason why you fell in love with the art of English?
Maybe I don't know. I was always like a book nerd and a history nerd, like that. The reading aspect of things as a kid. It probably has some influence. I mean, I don't emulate my style of writing on Neil
Yeah.
on any stretch of the imagination, and yet he's like a huge inspiration. Like I said, he was one of the only two that I took with me into my hiatus, and he's somebody who I had the pleasure of meeting twice, and one of them was like an actual couple hours, just one-on-one conversation, because his daughter, his second daughter at the time, was the same age as I was teaching, and as a special treat at the end of the year for the fourth graders, we used to listen to Coraline, him read it on CD by candlelight to make it extra creepy. And my kids wrote him letters, and he sent all, he wrote all this stuff back and signed some posters and sent it to the classroom, and gave me a bunch of advice. Not enough to get me off my butt back then and get me writing. I still waited another like 15 years before I fulfilled my dream, but definitely something that stuck with me and has kind of inspired me, and kind of co-opted as my own. When people ask me, like, how do you write a comic? What do you do? What's the inspiration? I kind of have co-opted his words and passed those on myself.
Gotcha. Very cool. That's like Neil Gaiman. I mean, obviously one of the greats, obviously. So
Yes.
Sandman is one of those ones when I read it, because I wasn't a reader when I found Sandman, and I was just like, this is way above my pay grade as far as reading goes. So that's why I asked that. I was like, was that your like doorway into English? Because that was kind of mine. Now I read it and I'm like, oh, he's talking about Shakespeare and stuff, and like, all these literary things that you're like, oh, I see what he's doing now. Before, when I was younger, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I like the guy with no eyeballs that like has teeth.
Yeah,
I like the Corinthian, but not. I don't know what's going on in this issue with the fairies and stuff, and like what's he alluding to, kind of thing. I didn't know Macbeth or any of that stuff. So, he's definitely a doorway, I think, to a lot of people into that English side of it. But any other?
Yeah, well, speaking, so I want to kind of go back to your comic a little bit too. I wanted to know, as far as like how the process came together, as far as when you got with Source Point Press, and how you got with your artist, because Adam Ferris is fantastic. I really liked it.
I could not agree more. It's really a very atypical origin story.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, I wrote the first half of this book in a bubble, right? I basically had the desire to do this for a long time, lifelong dream. And even the idea, or at least the comic booky sci-fi premise of an alternate version of you out there making contact with you, was something that had been brainstormed with a friend of mine a couple of years before I even sat down to write it. And it was actually the final catalyst. None of that was enough for me to stop deferring a dream and get me to actually start typing. And the final catalyst was a few conversations I was having with former students of mine that I was still in contact with. And I've been a teacher long enough where literally I've got students that are pushing 30 now. And it was one particular conversation with a former student of mine who I had as a fourth grader years and years before. And she was kind of going through that existential dread of 5 years went by in a blink of an eye. And that dream that I set aside in my early 20s to open a dance studio in Chicago, like, I think that door is closed. Like, what am I doing with my life? I took this job. I got in this relationship. I made all these decisions because I thought time was forever, and it's not. And it just, something clicked inside my brain. And so one summer, what I had been doing in my summers up to that point was I was writing a one-act play each year that we would then either put on at the elementary school while I was doing that, or then when I moved to middle school, and we put those on, and a couple of those got published. And that was kind of my side writing career, not the original goal. The original goal was a comic book, 20 years ago. This was more like, this is what I was doing. And I set that aside one summer and said, I am going to write a comic this summer. I'm just going to do it. Irrational confidence, blissful ignorance on, hey, I've got the chops to be able to write a play, right? So this should be easy.
Sure. It's a play with pictures.
Whoa,
right?
had I known, it probably would have scared me off for another 20 years. But I sat down and, in a bubble, as I said, wrote the first half. I wrote the first half of Parallel with what the rest of it would be in mind. But that was without artists, that was without publisher, that was without anything other than the need to tell the story. And I got to the end of that 32 pages, got to the end of that first half. Literally, you guys have read the book, the point where Landon wakes up out of his coma and he's on the ventilator. And it's like, it's real. Like that, bang, right there. Stop typing. And okay, I've put a summer's worth of effort into it, and the research that went into making the mental health and the doctors and the police officers and stuff real, right? All the people that I sourced for that and ran all that by and made it as good as I could make it. What comes next? Before I take another step in the direction of the second half of this book, like what could this be in the world? Like it is real enough on the computer at that point to explore a little bit further. So I did my due diligence, and even though I kind of wrote it in a style, or at least just sitting there by myself, it might as well have been a typewriter. It might as well have been a legal pad, right? I put the feelers out into the world, and it's like, okay, so what happens next, right? And I looked on dozens of websites of publishers, and it was pretty darn discouraging, right? Like nobody wants your unsolicited submission.
No.
And those companies that are taking unsolicited submissions don't want your script. They want art, maybe a pitch.
Yeah.
And that was like, it was like, oh no. And I was so in my bubble, and so I just walk into a comic shop and buy what I want kind of thing, that the world of Kickstarter, the world of self-publishing just wasn't even remotely on my radar. And yet I was far enough along in this process, this dream that was, 100 steps away from being fulfilled, but 1,000 steps further along than when it was just a dream deferred, that I wasn't going to give up. So I think you'll like this. I literally went old school, and I went to literal school, went into my classroom and made some copies of the script, and put them in like a classroom manila, yellow file folders with beautiful colored paper clips straight from my desk drawer, cover letter, the pitch, the script, or whatever. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go to Motor City Comic Con this year, and I'm going to walk up to, indie publishers, and I'll just say, here, would you like to, that kind of thing. Again, that blissful ignorance, irrational confidence, completely unaware that is not how it works in the 21st century.
You know what though? That makes you stand out, and that could actually get
and I think that's exactly what happened, because I go to Motor City Comic Con in this particular year, and the first booth that catches my eye is the SourcePoint press booth, because at cons, if you've never been to a con with SourcePoint, it's a beautiful thing. Like they were crushing it at cons for years before they, are now putting 13 books in previews a month, and just cut their deal with Simon & Schuster a couple of months ago, and are like the fastest growing indie publisher in the Midwest, and have an international reputation. But like they were crushing it at cons long before that. And I got there just before that bubble. And I'm looking behind this beautiful layout, and there's a man standing behind the counter with the most glorious giant red beard you've ever seen in your life. And I'm like, that dude looks like he knows what he's doing. And I beeline it for that guy, lock eyes with him. And it just happens to be Travis McIntyre, the co-founder, president, and editor-in-chief of SourcePoint. And I'm just, again, that irrational confidence is like, here is a thing. Will you please look at it? And like the not picking up on social cues, the weird way he's looking at me is not registering. I'm just like going on and on about it. And he said, I like the cut of your jib. It is like you're trying to sell me a comic like it's 1971, not the 21st century. You are weird, but you've got hustle. I'm going to go home. I'm going to read this tonight. You come back and see me tomorrow. And he wanted it.
Nice.
And he says to me, now at this point, I was thinking that first 32 pages was like the first oversized issue, right? I'm thinking floppies. He comes back the next day. He's like, we're going to make this. I'm going to find you an artist. Again, not how things are done, right? Like this is not me paying for the artist and handing them a complete project the Kickstarter way. He's like, we're going to find you all the artists and stuff like that, because clearly you don't know what you're doing. You can go write me a second half, right? This is a 64-page one shot. This is not issues. You can go write me a second half right now, right? And I'm like, yes, I can, which was very much like that thing that actors say when they lie at like an audition, like, you can ride a horse, can't you? And they're like, yes, of course. They don't even know what a horse looks like.
I've been riding horses since I was a child.
Do that? Travis, I can do that, no problem. I'm like, I don't know if I can do that, but I went off and then, guys, I got to live that other fanboy / even writer, comic book writer's dream, which was once Travis hooked me up with Adam and I saw his character sketches and his sample pages, right? And once I started writing pages directly for him, and once he started turning in pages from the first half, like to see what he could do, I got to write for an amazing artist. And the second half of the book was always going to be dark. It's those mini crescendos of tension where Landon's got to like make a pretty big decision for his own mental and physical well-being, you know, trading off what might not be in his best interest now for what he truly wants in his heart. Those dreams. Those were always going to be dark. Those were always going to be kind of like tension filled. But once I saw what Adam could do, like, I think it got a lot darker. I got to like write scenes and describe panels, knowing what he could do. And then, of course, living another writer's dream is he then does that bit of magic where he hits it out of the park and turns something back into you that's better than the words that you wrote and better than what you even saw in your head, which isn't supposed to be possible. And it is, and it just blew me away.
Yeah, that's very cool. And speaking of like the writing, so when you wrote it, you just said you wrote it like, did you actually have like a script layout, like a comic book script layout, or was it like, did you come up with the panel layouts and all that?
So like before the day I sat down to start typing, like I did my research where I am looking online for templates of how to write a comic script, because, you know, my first thought was, well, I'm writing scripts for the stage, right? So how different could it be? It's a lot different.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do, you know, I'm a rule follower, and, you know, I'm a teacher. Like, I got to teach grammar rules. I'm going to follow the rules of script writing. And I found what did I use? Like a Fred Van Lente, like sample script that I found online. And just to know like how many times you hit indent before the dialogue, like how do you number dialogue? How do you number the pages? Like how many indents, or where does the colon go when it's the difference between like a sound effect or a bit of narration or a speech bubble or whatever it is, just like learning the physicality of it. And then I think probably what would have scared me off had I known how much more there is when you're writing a comic in the same way. Okay, let me see if I can frame it this way. In the same way that when you read a comic, two different parts of your brain are firing at the same time, right? You're following the graphic storyline, you're following the narrative storyline. And it's actually two different parts of your brain, studies have shown, that are following. So your brain's actually working harder to read a comic and more active than it is to read prose or just watch like film. And very similar to that, when you're writing a comic script, your brain's doing like a dozen things at once, and you're balancing a dozen things at once. Like there is the raw narrative storyline, but the exact same time, like for me, I'm trying to keep the formatting of the page correct. Right. At the exact same time, you're talking about the pacing of the story, right? When you're writing prose, you're not worried about the size of a panel because it slows down or speeds up the pace of the story. You're not worried about a panel that reveals something being on a facing page or you want it on a page turn, right? You're not worried about a bit of dialogue or a bit of speech, and does it go on too long and won't fit in one word bubble or another, or will take up too much of the panel size. And you're doing all of that at once and balancing all of that at once as you write a comic script. And so like it was hard, it was grueling, it was magical all at once.
Yeah. I actually right now I'm writing an issue, like a first issue of a comic.
Yeah.
I'm going through that where I'm like, okay, and the artist that I got is just a friend of mine. He's not really, he's not a comic artist. So I'm doing the panel layouts and everything too, like the page layouts. So I'm like, I have to come up with, okay, panel 1, what does it look like? How big is it? What's going on in it? And then like the dialogue and everything. And then like you said, the page turn. Is this on an even page, an odd page? What's going on? So I feel what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it's very fulfilling though when you see the page turns work and everything, and you're like, wow, this feels like a real comic now. And
oh yeah, when it comes together, I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So
So
very cool.
Absolutely.
So when with SourcePoint and everything, they just chose to do the graphic novel, the single. Are you how long did it take to like to come out and all that? Like what was the printing process like? Did you have any hand in that, or did they just take it from your
I mean, this is so I have to be really careful because several of my colleagues have said I need to be a little less liberal in my usage of the word lucky.
Okay.
Because so much of this is luck, right? I mean, they really took care of me, knowing that I might as well have been like 15 coming to them with like the amount of knowledge that I had about how this comics publishing works and stuff like that, even though I was like 40 and it was like, I just didn't know, you know? And so like them hooking me up with artists and with the lettering and the publishing aspect with really the only I had to write it and I have to help. It gave me Bob Sally, a great writer in his own right, as my editor. I had to write it, and then obviously like because it's indie comics, a lot of the promotion is on me then as well,
right?
Which is crazy because in indie comics, something that I didn't know from being on the other side of it for so long is how much time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears go into it, just from a production standpoint, and then actually a time standpoint.
Right.
So it was kind of weird. Like it took a couple of years, and it was like this very kind of roller coaster ride in my mind, because there's like a month or 2 months would go by and it would just seem very nothing is happening, and then those lulls would then be punctuated with like a fanboy's dream where that first page comes in, right? Or the day that Justin Birch, who is a ridiculously talented letterer, who letters indie books, who letters Marvel, who letters DC, and hits it out of the park every single time. The day he kind of took my hint and was like, "So, do you want to do a FaceTime call and watch me letter a couple of pages of your book?" And I'm like, "Oh yes, please, thank you for taking the bait," as I've been not so subtly hinting at this. And there was nothing besides like a Passover edit from me like for 2 months before that, and suddenly like a dream come true, and I'm like watching it come alive on the page.
That's very cool.
And but like and then the day it shows up in previews, right? And then the day that it's out in the world, and the day I do my first interview, and then because of the pandemic, all my signings and cons, which were going to be the last piece of it, kind of got derailed for almost a full year. And then I just got the next big thrill, which was last weekend. I did my first event.
I saw that on Instagram. Yeah, that's so cool.
I was at the Detroit Festival of Books, and like for the very first time, I got to fulfill that piece of the dream where I'm on the other side of the table and somebody coming up to me is like, "Will you sign this?" And I'm like, "Absolutely." You know what I mean? Like that thing that I asked of so many creators that I admired. So it's like this very long process that was kind of like punctuated by these little dreams come true along the way, but amazing from start to finish.
Yeah, that's very.
And I'll tell you what that process has done. Is it has changed the way I read and consume comics. I think, especially if we grew up in the mass market or direct market, floppy month to month kind of outlook, like it's very easy to take for granted the time and the effort and that goes into putting any story out into the world.
Right.
And so like being on the other side of that and seeing the way SourcePoint Press comes together, like as a family, and so many people are involved in the production of one story, has made me slough off that taking for granted everything that goes into these projects. And every time I read something, not only am I still able to lose myself the same way I did when I was 12, but also seeing the work that goes behind it actually adds a layer of richness to the experience.
Right.
That's cool. That's such a fulfilling thing to see, to have the knowledge of you taking that book, reading it, and being, like you said, like kid, like this story is awesome. And then being like, wow, think of all the people and everything that had to come together to make this incredible journey that I'm going on. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, I don't want to take too much more of your time because it's an hour long basically. But if you want to plug anything right now, or do you have anything else coming out from
let me tell you this. So like the other thing that I really took away from this experience from the indie comic perspective is how much it means to actually support indie creators and indie companies with your dollars. Because again, this is not me bashing the big two, but with 80 years of infrastructure, as I mentioned before, it's a very different animal on the production side. And your dollar goes so far with indie comics. And the world of comics is, it's like an iceberg, right? I mean, 85% of comics are indie comics. And yet most companies, most creators are struggling to get one project out there, survive a year and stuff like that. So like, you buy a book like Parallel, which a pretty densely packed and rereadable 64 pages at $7, those dollars literally put food on tables and clothes on backs.
Right.
And keep local and indie artists and creators and businesses in business. And they're the ones that are producing most of our content in the world of comics. So like if anything that we talked about today intrigues you and you want a copy of Parallel, it's really, really easy to do. You can go into your LCS and hit them up with the Diamond order code, because we're probably going to sell out by the end of this fall with cons and stuff like that. Honestly, it's getting close. I think there's under 200 copies left out of the entire print run, which is, pretty good for an unknown name and not having any cons or signings in the middle of a pandemic. But you can still hit up your LCS and hit them up with the Diamond order code, which is FEB20 1983. Easy to remember because that's the year Return of the Jedi came out.
We'll make sure to have it in the comments,
because they're not going to know. They're not going to know my name. They're not going to know Parallel. They may not even know Source Point. But Diamond order code is Diamond order code. Or you can go straight to sourcepointpress.com, and we've got digital copies there and the paper copies before they run out. On the con circuit this summer and this fall. Hit me up on Instagram, @JDouglas Writes. I do not big time people. In fact, I will talk your ear off. You hit me up in a DM and just want a question and you're, very polite or whatever. I'll end up talking to you probably so long that you're the one who's going to say, listen, I've got to go. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I've got to go. So thank you for answering my question and 40 other that I didn't ask. And then obviously come over there for the giveaway as well. I think I'm probably going to be selling a few of those variants before those go as well on IG. But yeah, go buy a copy and support SourcePoint, support local, and support Parallel. And I really appreciate the time, guys.
Yeah, everybody, please go buy this book. It's fantastic. Jason, thank you very much for meeting with us. Yeah, we really enjoyed it. It's great talking to you. And everybody, read more comics, read more indie comics.
Yes, keep the industry going.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jason.
My pleasure, gentlemen.